Tonight we follow a different path for Jon Snow, a path where Dragonstone kept one secret deeper than anyone still breathing ever guessed. Under the volcano's heart, locked in old Valyrian magic and the planet's own fire, the last descendant of Vhagar had slept for 170 years. It waited for blood that smelled like home. Jon came to the island begging for dragon glass and an alliance with a foreign queen. He left as something the realm had not seen in 3 generations, a Targaryen on dragonback. The moment that ancient creature rose from the dark behind him, 2 wars became impossible to stop. The war the world actually needed and the war the world was determined to fight instead. This is what might have happened if Jon Snow bonded with Vhagar's last descendant, and what it cost him to live through it. Dragonstone, what he came for. Jon Snow arrived on a gray morning with a handful of men and no plan that could survive contact with a queen who already commanded 3 dragons. Davos Seaworth had called it the most reckless thing Jon had done since taking a knife in the chest. Davos treated that death as a useful measuring stick for recklessness, given that Jon had technically stopped breathing from it. Jon answered that the Night King's army had numbers no northern force could match on open ground, and that the only living person with both dragons and a claim on the south currently sat on an island 30 miles off the coast. Davos countered that the same person expected kings to kneel and had crossed the narrow sea precisely so people would stop failing to do so. Both of them were right. The approach by boat was the approach the castle had been built for: steep cliffs, black stone rising from the rock as if the rock itself had one day decided to become a fortress. The Targaryens had found it that way. Above it, 3 dragons circled in the gray sky. Jon stood at the prow and watched them and felt the same cold weight he always felt when the scale of the world outgrew the scale men were built to fight. He had felt it north of the wall. He felt it here. He filed it under the only category that mattered: real. Davos stood beside him. "You're not going to kneel. I'm king in the north." She's going to mention that several times, possibly with increasing emphasis. "I know, Davos." The queen's reception was everything the castle promised: Dothraki lining the steps, unsullied at the gate. A procession designed to remind every visitor that the woman waiting at the end of it no longer needed to impress anyone. Jon walked through it with the economy of a man trained by Ned Stark, refined by the Night's Watch and further refined by dying. He performed neither courage nor fear. Tyrion Lannister met him at the top of the steps. "Lord Snow," Tyrion said, then corrected himself before Jon could. "King Snow, my apologies, the title is still new enough that the realm hasn't finished adjusting." He studied Jon the way a man studies someone across a table when the only thing that has ever kept him alive is reading people correctly. "How was the crossing?" "Cold, the north tends to export that." Tyrion gestured toward the doors. "The queen will receive you in the throne room. I'd recommend against leading with the White Walkers. There's an order that works better: demonstrate you're not a threat, demonstrate you're useful, then raise the thing that sounds like madness." He paused. "The White Walkers are, at this juncture, going to sound like madness." "They are madness," Jon said. "They're also real." "Yes, but she doesn't know that yet. She knows what she knows, and she spent the last year learning the world is significantly less organized than she planned for. Try not to add too much new information at once." They went inside. Daenerys, the first meeting. The throne room of Dragonstone had been designed around the idea of a stone egg. High black walls, carved dragons climbing toward the ceiling. A throne that was not the Iron Throne but had clearly been made by people who understood exactly what a throne was meant to communicate. Daenerys sat in it the way she sat in most things. Not as though she had claimed it, but as though she had always been in it and the rest of the world was simply catching up. She was younger than Jon expected. She was more beautiful than he expected. She watched him with the patience of someone who had already decided several things about the man in front of her. "You will forgive me if I don't kneel," Jon said before she could open with it. "I don't mean it as disrespect. I am the king in the north. My people chose me. I did not choose myself. Kneeling to you would undo what they chose, and they are the people whose lives I am here to protect." He met her eyes. "I came to ask for dragon glass and an alliance. I am offering you the same, the North's support in the wars to come. I am asking for your support in the war that is already here." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when the important thing is already being said, and the waiting is only performance. "You're asking me to fight alongside you," she said. "Against the Night King, against the dead." "You are the first person who has arrived on this island," Daenerys said, "to tell me that his primary concern is dead men walking north of a wall. I'm probably the first person who's arrived on this island who's seen them." She held his gaze. "Missandei, have the dragon glass mines surveyed, find out what we have." Then back to Jon. "You may mine the dragon glass you need. In exchange, I would ask that you tell me what you actually know about what is coming, not the summary, the detail. I find summaries are for people who have already decided. Fair, Jon said. It is, she did not look away. You haven't asked me to bend the knee. I didn't come here for that. No, you came here because you're desperate enough to ask a foreign queen for rocks. There was something in the words that was not cruelty, something closer to recognition, the assessment of a woman who understood desperation from the inside and respected the honesty of his. Tell me about the dead, everything you know, then I'll decide whether you're a king or a man with a story. Jon sat, he told her. It took most of the afternoon. The cave, what he found there. The dragon glass was in the caves beneath Dragonstone. Jon went down with Daenerys the next day, her idea, the queen's efficient decision to see the practical component of the alliance rather than merely authorize it. The caves were old and dark and warm with the heat that comes from the earth's own fire, not the surface heat the sun produces. They walked with torches. The obsidian seams ran everywhere, gleaming with the specific dark brilliance of a material that was not quite stone and not quite glass, and that had been used for weapons and ceremonial objects for 8,000 years before anyone in Westeros understood why it mattered. Daenerys showed him the cave paintings, older than the Valyrian freehold, older than the Targaryens, the first men and the children of the forest leaving their record in images because they had no written language, spirals that echoed the patterns the White Walkers made with their dead, figures of men and children standing side by side. They fought together, Jon said, before the last time. I know what the histories say. Then you know it's real. She held the torch and looked at the wall. Her face did something that was not performed. The actual Daenerys under the queen. The woman who had crossed the world on the belief that she was heir to a dynasty 300 years old, now standing in evidence that the world had been stranger and older than any dynasty for far longer. I know what the histories say, she repeated. I am deciding what I believe. Sometimes there isn't time for the deciding. She looked at him. Show me everything, everything in this cave, then I'll decide. They went deeper, the seams ran down and east. Jon followed them with the orientation of someone who had tracked things in the dark long enough that the dark was no longer an obstacle, only the medium. He held the torch. He watched the seams, and then the warmth changed. Not geological warmth, something else. A wrong warmth, a warmth that recognized something and was answering the recognition. Jon stopped. What is it? Daenerys asked. He held the torch out. The tunnel continued past the dragon glass into a deeper dark that did not appear on any map of Dragonstone's caves. Davos had sourced the maps from the Citadel, old maps, the legacy of Meisters who had served here. This passage was not on them. There's something further, Jon said. The maps don't show it. I know, he looked at her. I want to go further. Daenerys looked at the passage, then at him. She had the expression of a woman who had learned, through the particular education of being Daenerys Targaryen, that the things that looked most like traps were often simply interesting. Lead, she said. Jon led. The passage went down 50 feet, leveled, then opened without warning into a chamber that was not natural, too round, too proportional. The stone too smooth at the walls. It had been shaped by something that understood the precise dimensions a dragon required. Jon held the torch higher. The heat in the chamber was extraordinary, not the burning heat of open fire. The deep, impossible heat of something that had been smoldering for a very long time without going out. And in the center, coiled in a posture too structured to be accidental, too perfect to be the result of decay, was a shape the torch revealed in pieces. Scale the size of a cartwheel, claw 5 feet from tip to joint, a tail wound in the architecture of something that had decided exactly how to be still. Daenerys made a sound, not a word, the sound a person makes when they see something they have no category for. The shape was enormous, not Drogon enormous, regal size perhaps, the middle dragon, large without being the largest, but it was ancient in a way the younger dragons were not. The scales were darker, preserved, the colors of something that had been sleeping so long even the colors had learned patience. It was breathing, not visibly, not the rise and fall of a living chest, but the air in the chamber moved in a rhythm the stone was not producing. In, out, impossibly slow. The respiration of something that had been asleep for 170 years and had kept the pace of a thing that did not need the same urgency from breathing that the living required. Jon took a step forward. Daenerys grabbed his arm. Don't. It's not moving. It's a dragon, they don't need to move to kill you. Jon looked at the shape, at the scale, at the ancient preserved stillness. and he felt the warmth that had pulled him through the passage, and that was now simply present in the chamber, not a pull anymore, a presence. The specific awareness of something that was aware of him, not through sight or sound or smell, but through something that operated at a level he did not have words for. He took another step. The eye opened. The eye what the dragon saw. Amber gold, not the brilliant, vivid gold of the younger dragons, the amber of something old, preserved, the color of resin rather than fire. It was the size of Jon's chest, and it looked at him with the attention of something that had been waiting a very long time and was not surprised the waiting was over. Jon did not run. This was not courage in any philosophical sense. It was the practical quality of a man who had stopped running from things because running had repeatedly failed as a strategy, and he had decided to try standing still instead. He stood still. The eye regarded him. Then the great head moved, slowly, the enormous muscle of a neck lifting the head from its cold position, the head alone the size of a horse. The dragon breathed on him, not fire, breath, the vast exhale of something that had been holding its breath for 170 years and was letting it out at last. The breath was warm in a way that should have burned and did not, a warmth that recognized him rather than consumed him. The warmth of something that knew his blood and was greeting it. Jon held very still. The head came close, impossibly close, the scaled face 3 feet from his, the amber eye regarding him with an intelligence that was not human and was not absent. Jon could smell it, old heat, deep earth, the faint sulfur of volcanic preservation. Underneath that something else, something that was not a smell but registered in the same way, recognition. The dragon recognized him the way the wolf had recognized him, the way Ghost had come to him in the snow, not chosen. Inherent. Jon raised his hand, he put it against the scale. The scale was warm and rough. The warmth went up his arm and through his chest and into him in a way that was nothing like what he had expected and exactly what he had expected at the same time. The connection, the bond, the thing dragon writers in the histories described as the moment nothing could undo. He felt the dragon the way he felt Ghost, not words, presence, the vast ancient awareness of a creature that had been sleeping in rock for 170 years and that had woken for him. Behind him, Daenerys had not moved. She stood at the chamber's entrance looking at what was happening. Her face did something Jon did not see because he was not looking at her. Davos would describe it later, second-hand from Missandei, who had heard it from a guard. The queen had looked at the dragon choosing the king in the north, and her face had been doing something that was not rage and not grief and not joy, but some combination of all three that had no name in any language on either side of the narrow sea. The dragon made a sound, not a roar, something lower, a recognition expressed in sound. The same register the breath had been, the communication between a dragon and the person it had decided on, which was not a decision the way humans made decisions, but a fact the way biology made facts. This one. Jon stood with his hand on the scale, the amber eye watched him. "What is your name?" he said. He did not know why he said it. He knew the dragon could not answer. But it felt right to ask the way it felt right to talk to Ghost, who also could not answer in the specific understanding that communication between a man and a wolf or a man and a dragon did not depend on language. The eye regarded him. Vhagar. The word arrived not from anywhere external but from somewhere internal. The part of him that was Lyanna's blood and Rhaegar's blood and 8,000 years of dragon lords reaching down through time. The ancestral knowledge of a dynasty that had spent 300 years in the company of these creatures and had never quite finished leaving its traces in the bloodline. Vhagar. The dragon breathed out again, the warmth in the chamber rose. Behind him he heard Daenerys say, "We need to go up." Her voice was steady, he gave her that. "Yes," Jon said. He turned from the dragon. The dragon watched him go. When they reached the passage entrance and Jon looked back, Vhagar's eye was still open. Amber gold in the chamber's dark, watching the passage the way a fire watches a door after someone has closed it, with the specific awareness of something that knew what was on the other side and was simply waiting for it to open again. The courtyard, what Daenerys did. They came out of the cave into the courtyard. Daenerys walked past her advisors and the unsullied guards and went to the battlements and looked at the sea. Jon let her. He stood in the courtyard. Tyrion appeared beside him. "What happened down there?" "There's a dragon beneath the island." Tyrion looked at him. "I'm sorry." A dragon in the caves beneath Dragonstone, preserved, sleeping, very large. Tyrion opened his mouth and closed it, and it woke when I touched the stone, it breathed on me, I put my hand on it. Tyrion turned to look at Daenerys on the battlements. Oh. Yes, and she was there, she saw it. She saw it. Tyrion absorbed this with the particular quality of a man absorbing information that was both much worse and much more interesting than expected. A dragon chose you. A dragon chose me in front of Daenerys Targaryen. In front of Daenerys Targaryen, who came to this island on the understanding that she was the last dragon lord. I know. And has 3 dragons. I know, Tyrion. Tyrion looked at the battlements. Right. He produced 2 cups of wine from somewhere and handed one to Jon. Drink this, then we're going to have a very long conversation about what happens next and whether you're still alive at the end of it. Jon drank the wine. Daenerys turned from the battlements. She came back to the courtyard with the specific posture of a woman who had made a decision in private and was now executing it in public. The decision was control. She walked to Jon with her counsel watching, stopped in front of him and held his gaze. You didn't know it was there. No. You didn't come here for that. I came for Dragonglass and an alliance. She held the gaze, testing, reading him the way she read everything. For performance, for the gap between what someone projected and what they were actually doing. The dragon has never responded to me, she said, or to anyone. I didn't know it existed. The island's histories say nothing of it. She looked at him. It chose you. Yes. Because you're Targaryen? It was not a question. She had been doing the arithmetic since the chamber. You came here as Jon Snow, bastard son of Ned Stark, king in the north, but a dragon doesn't choose northern bastards. Her voice was controlled. Who are you? Jon looked at her. I don't know yet. I have suspicions. I haven't been able to confirm them. Suspicions? She held the word. You're standing in my courtyard on my island, having just bonded with a dragon that has been sleeping in my island's foundations for 170 years, and you have suspicions. My father, Ned Stark, kept a secret about my birth. I know enough to know the secret exists. I don't know the full content of it. She held the gaze a moment longer. You will stay as a guest, not a prisoner, as a guest who is going to tell me everything he suspects in order beginning tonight. She looked at Tyrion. Arrange dinner, just us, no council. Then back to Jon. And whatever is in that cave, whatever that dragon is, it will remain in that cave until I know what it is and what it means and what it intends. I don't think it intends anything specific, Jon said. It's asleep. It woke for you, Daenerys said. It intends something. She walked past him toward the keep. Tyrion watched her go. How are you at dinner conversation? He asked Jon. Not great. Honest, that might actually help, he started after Daenerys. Try not to mention the White Walkers for at least the first hour. Jon stood in the courtyard alone. He looked at the cave entrance. From somewhere beneath the rock he could feel the warmth. Hagar, awake now in the dark, waiting with the patience of something that had already demonstrated it could wait 170 years. Jon had a dragon. He had come to Dragonstone for Dragonglass. He thought, the North is not going to believe this. He went inside. Dinner, the truth she drew out of him. The dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as Tyrion had predicted and considerably more honest than Jon had planned. Daenerys asked questions the way she did most things, with the patience of a woman who had time and the directness of one who had decided that having time was not a reason to waste it. She asked about his death and his resurrection. Jon confirmed both with the bluntness he brought to most things he wished were not true. She absorbed it. She asked about the Night's Watch, about what he had seen north of the Wall, about the specific details of White behavior and White Walker movement that she had been hearing as summary and now wanted as account. He gave her the account. She listened with the part of her that was not the queen but the person who had been born to parents she never knew and raised in a world that kept trying to reduce her to a symbol. The part of her that recognized other people who had been made into symbols and found the making wearing. An hour in she said, "What do you think you are?" "What do you mean?" "You said you have suspicions about your birth, about why the dragon chose you." She held the wine cup. "I want to know what you think you are, not what you know, what you think." Jon sat with it. "I think," he said slowly, "that Ned Stark was not my father. I think my mother was a Stark. I think my father," he stopped. "I think my father was Targaryen. The specifics I can't confirm. My father Ned took the secret to his grave." He held her gaze. "I think the dragon answers that question if anyone needed it answered." Daenerys held the wine cup. "Rhaegar had a son." "Yes." "Your brother, he disappeared with Lyanna Stark before the rebellion. Ned Stark came back from the south with a bastard and never explained the mother. She held onto it. I've been living in the gap between those two facts my whole life. Silence in the room. Daenerys set the cup down. If you are Rhaegar's son, she said carefully, then you are not a bastard. Rhaegar was married to Lyanna Stark before, the histories suggest before you were born. The Maesters who have studied the rebellion think the marriage may have been real. She held his gaze. Which would make you the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen. A pause. Which would make you the heir to the Iron Throne. I'm the king in the north. You're the heir to the Iron Throne, Daenerys said. Her voice was very controlled. Whether you want it or not. I don't want it. I know you don't, she held the gaze. That is the most annoying thing you could possibly have said. She picked the cup back up and drank. I have spent my life preparing for the throne. Every decision I have ever made has been oriented around reclaiming it. I crossed the sea, I raised an army, I freed slaves, I bred dragons. She held the gaze. I came to Westeros with 3 dragons and a claim I have been building since I was a child. And in my first month on this island, a northern king comes to ask for rocks and a dragon in my basement bonds with him because he happens to have my brother's blood. Jon said nothing. I am not going to give you the throne, she said. I want you to understand that, whatever the bloodline says, whatever the legal succession, I am not going to simply step aside. I'm not asking you to. I know you're not asking. She held the gaze. That's also annoying. It would be easier if you were trying to take it. Then I'd know exactly what to do with you. She set the cup down. Instead, you're sitting in my dining room genuinely not caring about the most important object in the known world, which means I cannot fight you and I cannot trust you, and I cannot put you in a cell because you haven't actually done anything except let a dragon breathe on you. Jon looked at her. What do you want to do with me? She held his gaze for a long moment. I want to figure out what you are, and then I want to figure out how to make you useful. She paused. The dragon being yours doesn't change the immediate problem, which is that you need dragon glass and I need allies, and the Night King doesn't care about either of our claims to the throne. No, Jon agreed. So we continue as we were. You mine the dragon glass. She stopped, started again. We discuss the terms of an alliance. And the dragon. She held the gaze. And the dragon is going to need to come out of the cave eventually. When it does, she held the gaze. When it does, the world is going to know, and what the world is going to say is not Jon Snow has a dragon. What it's going to say is Rhaegar's heir has come home. Jon looked at her. That's not what I am. It doesn't matter what you are, Daenerys said. It matters what the world says you are. You learned that in the north. I learned it in exile. The story people tell about you is more powerful than the truth of you. And the story they're going to tell about you is that the true king has a dragon. She refilled her cup. Get some sleep, you're going to need it. Because tomorrow the world starts learning what happened in that cave and there is nothing either of us can do to stop it. Tyrion, what he did with the information. Tyrion spent most of the night thinking. This was not unusual. Tyrion spent most nights thinking and had done so since he was old enough to understand that thinking was the thing he was better at than everything else. But thinking tonight was different because the information was the kind that could change the fundamental shape of the war. The kind that arrived once or twice in a generation and required not just thinking, but the specific kind of thinking that distinguished between what was true and what was strategically manageable. The truths as he assembled them. Jon Snow was almost certainly Rhaegar's son. The dragon had settled this more definitively than any birth document could. Dragons did not bond with northern bastards. If Jon was Targaryen, the legitimacy question became real. If his parents had been married, and Tyrion had read enough of the rebellion's histories to know that marriage had been whispered about in Dornish chronicles for 30 years, then Jon outranked Daenerys in the succession. This was manageable, barely, but manageable. What was less manageable was the second truth. Daenerys already knew all of this. She had been alone with Jon for 3 hours. She was not stupid. She had done the same arithmetic Tyrion had done in roughly the same time, with the additional advantage of being present when the arithmetic was first performed by a dragon's amber eye. She was going to be afraid, not of Jon, of what Jon represented. She had been building toward this her whole life, and now there was a complication she had not planned for. And Daenerys did not handle complications the same way in every instance. Sometimes she handled them brilliantly, sometimes she burned them. Tyrion needed to manage this before the burning stage arrived. He went to Varys in the morning. Varys was, as Varys always was, already aware of most of the problem. A 4th dragon, Varys said. He did not look particularly surprised. Varys had the quality of a man who had decided not to be surprised by things because surprise was inefficient. A 4th dragon, Tyrion confirmed, bonded to Jon Snow, who is almost certainly Aegon Targaryen very said, yes. My little birds have been suggesting this for some time. The marriage evidence from Dorne has been available to anyone who looked carefully for 30 years. I looked carefully approximately 20 years ago. He held Tyrion's gaze. I chose to wait for the right moment to act on the looking. Tyrion looked at him, and is this the right moment? Varys folded his hands. It's a moment, whether it's right depends entirely on what we do with it. He looked at the window, the sea, the morning. The queen is going to want to establish control over the situation. Her first instinct will be to contain Jon Snow, not violently, she is not Aerys, but firmly. She will want to keep him here on the island as an ally she can see rather than a rival she cannot. And Jon Snow. Jon Snow genuinely does not want the throne. Varys looked at Tyrion. I have spent my life being paid to determine the difference between men who say they don't want power and men who mean it. He means it, which makes him either the most useful or the most dangerous person we've encountered this year, depending on whether we can keep the realm from choosing him anyway. The realm will choose him. Yes, Varys was quiet for a moment. The realm is very fond of kings who don't want to be king. They find it reassuring. It suggests competence without ambition, which is the specific combination they most need and least expect. He held Tyrion's gaze. When word spreads, and it will spread within the week, servants being servants, that a Targaryen man arrived at Dragonstone and had a dragon choose him in the queen's own caves, the lords who have been hesitating about Daenerys will not hesitate about him. Because he's a man. Partly because he's northern and northern raised and they'll call him Westerosi in the way they'll never call her that, because he's a dragon rider and not a foreign conqueror, because he doesn't want it. He paused. The combination is very appealing to men who have been waiting for an excuse to support a cause they don't have yet. Tyrion looked at the window. What do we do? We ensure, Varys said, that the choice the realm makes when it makes it is a choice that serves the realm rather than dividing it, which means we need Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen to arrive at an arrangement before the realm forces one on them. He looked at Tyrion. That is your job. I will manage the information. You will manage the people. Tyrion looked at him. I hate this job. You're very good at it. That's what makes it terrible. He went to find Jon. What loyalty cost him? Jorah Mormont came to find Jon on the second day, not officially. He came to the courtyard where Jon was working with Hagar, the two of them going through the exercises Jon had been developing with the bond, learning what the dragon could do and how it communicated, what it was capable of and what it needed. He came and stood at the courtyard's edge and watched. Jon noticed him. Jorah Mormont was not a man who was easy to miss. He was large in the northern way, the Mormont way. Bear Island produced a specific kind of person built for cold and hardship, and the particular loyalty that cold and hardship produced when they had been in someone's family long enough. Jon had heard of him. Jorah's story was part of the Wall's history in a sideways fashion, the man who had fled Westeros ahead of Ned Stark's justice and who had been in exile ever since. He was also the man who had been at Daenerys' side for longer than anyone. Jon went to him. Sir Jorah. Jorah held the gaze with the look of a man who had been deciding something and had arrived at the end of the deciding. Lord Snow, he said, then with the correction arriving before Jon made it, Your Grace, I don't know what to call you yet. Jon works. Jorah was quiet. I want to tell you something, he said directly because I think you prefer direct. I do. I have followed Daenerys Targaryen since she was a girl sold to call for political gain. I have followed her through things that should have broken her, and through things she did that I didn't agree with, and through everything that made her what she is. He held on to it. My loyalty to her is the thing I have instead of my house and instead of my honor in the ordinary sense, and instead of anything else I might have built if my life had gone differently. Jon held his gaze. I understand. I'm not sure you do, Jorah was quiet. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand where I'm standing when I say what I'm about to say. He paused. You are good for her, the dragon, the truth of what you are, the fact that you don't want the throne. She has been surrounded by people who want things from her for so long that the concept of someone who doesn't want the specific thing she has, it affects her. I can see it. Jon said nothing. I'm not asking you to take care of her. She doesn't need taking care of. I'm telling you that I see what is happening between the two of you and I am asking you not to be careless with it. He held on to it. She has been hurt by carelessness more than by cruelty. The people who hurt her deliberately she could fight. The people who simply didn't account for what they were doing to her, those are the ones that left marks. Jon held his gaze. I'm not planning to be careless. No, I don't think you are. I think you're the most careful man with other people's dignity that I've ever met who actually does anything. He paused. That's meant as a compliment. I took it as one. Jorah held the gaze a moment longer. One more thing, when the time comes when you go north and she goes south and the separation is real, tell her plainly, don't let her find out through the absence. She spent her life finding things out through absence, and it's the specific shape of hurt she has the least defense against. He held on to it. Tell her you're going, tell her what it means, she'll manage it, she manages everything. Jon held his gaze. I will. Jorah held the gaze one final moment, then he nodded and went back toward the keep. Jon watched him go. He thought, the loyalty Jorah carries for her is the thing I want to carry for the North. That was not nothing, that was, in fact, everything. The truth confirmed, Sam's message. When the message arrived from Bran on the 6th day, Jon received it alone. Davos brought it to him in the private rooms he'd been given, rooms that were comfortable in a way that communicated he was a guest of high standing rather than comfortable in a way that communicated he was welcome to stay as long as he wanted. There was a difference. Jon had noticed it. He read the letter, he read it twice, then he sat with it for a long time. The letter was from Bran, but the information was Sam's. Sam, who was at the Citadel and who had found the record of the marriage in a Septon's private diary, the diary of the man who had married Rhaegar Targaryen to Lyanna Stark in a secret ceremony in Dorne before the Tower of Joy. The diary was specific. The names were specific. The date was specific. Rhaegar had set aside his first wife, annulled the marriage legally under Valyrian tradition, and married Lyanna in a ceremony before gods and Septon both. Jon was not a bastard. He was Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, legitimate and trueborn, the heir to the Iron Throne by the laws of succession that had governed the Targaryen dynasty for 300 years. He sat with this for an hour, then he went to find Daenerys. He found her on the clifftop where she went when she wanted to think without being watched. He had identified the spot in the first week, not by following her but by noticing her absence from the places she was usually in and identifying the one place with line of sight to the dragons that was also sheltered from the wind. She was watching Drogon in the sky. He came to stand beside her. She looked at him, then at the letter in his hand. The confirmation, she said. Yes. I assumed it would come. I assumed it existed and that someone would find it and that when they did it would say what it seems to say. She held the gaze. How does it feel? Strange. Strange, she seemed to consider this. You've been Jon Snow your whole life. Yes. And now you're Aegon Targaryen. I don't know that name. I know Snow, I know Stark, I know Castle Black and the Wall and Ghost and what it's like to die. He looked at her. I don't know what it means to be a Targaryen. I don't have 30 years of that the way you do. She looked at him. You have the dragon. That's what 30 years of it feels like. Jon looked at the sea. We have to tell your council. They already know. Varys knew before I told him. Tyrion guessed the night it happened. She watched Drogon, the great black dragon banking in the gray sky, the scales catching the light. The lords will know within a month, my lords, the lords who are deciding whether to support me. She paused. Some of them will decide you're a better option. Tell them I'm not interested. That's not how this works. I know because I've tried to tell people I was interested and they disagreed with me for years regardless. You can't tell lords what to want. They'll want what they want. She looked at him. I need to know what you'll do when they come to you. I'll tell them I'm king in the north, and if they say they want me for more than that, Jon looked at her. I'll tell them I have a war to fight and that the war is north of the wall and that any lord who wants to have political arguments while the dead are building their army is welcome to lead the next expedition beyond the wall himself. He looked at her. I mean it. She looked at him. I know you do. That's the part I can't decide what to do with. She looked back at Drogon. If you were lying, if this was strategy, I'd know how to respond. You're not lying. You're a man who came for dragon glass and ended up with a dragon and who is genuinely more concerned about the dead than about the throne. She looked at the sky. I have been around political men my entire life. I have never met one who was more concerned about the dead than the throne. Jon said nothing. We need to bring Hagar out, she said. We can't hide it indefinitely. The servants know. The information is already moving. She looked at him. When it comes out, and it's going to come out this week, I want to control how it comes out. What does that mean? It means you present as my ally, not my rival, not the true heir, my ally, a Targaryen dragonlord who came to Dragonstone to join forces against the Night King, 2 Targaryens, 2 dragons. She looked at him. The message is, this is strength, not division. Jon looked at her. You want us to appear unified. I want us to appear exactly what we are, 2 people who need each other. The appearance of unity follows from that naturally. A moment. All right, he said. Tomorrow, she said, we bring the dragon out tomorrow. she looked back at Drogon in the sky. His name is Vhagar, Jon said. She was quiet for a moment. Vhagar's blood, her last descendant. Ian thought, the old Meister at Castle Black, he knew the histories. Jon held the gaze on the sea. She was Visnya's dragon, the largest Targaryen dragon before Balerion. She outlived 4 kings, she died in the dance. Above the god's eye, Daenerys said. Caraxes brought her down, both dragons died in that lake and both riders with them. She held her gaze on the sky. She killed Arax over the sea before that. Lucerys Velaryon was 13 years old. She paused. I know the histories too. I thought you should know the name. She looked at the sky. Tomorrow. Jon left her on the cliff. Vhagar the Rising. Vhagar rose from the earth in the afternoon. Jon went to the cave entrance alone. Daenerys had offered to come, but Jon had asked to go first, the specific logic of a first bond being as private as possible before becoming public. She had accepted this. He went to the cave entrance and held the torch and went down. Vhagar was awake. The amber eye found him before the torch found the dragon, the glow of it visible in the dark before the scale, before the mass, before the full reality of the creature that had been preserved in this chamber for 170 years. Vhagar had been moving since the day before. Jon had felt it through the bond, the slow circulation of something returning to its body after an impossible sleep, the stiffness of scaled muscle relearning how to be used. Jon put his hand on the scale again, the warmth answered. He said nothing. He did not need to say anything. The connection was not language and did not require it. It was more primitive and more complete than language. The bond between a rider and a dragon that the histories described as something that rewired both of them, that changed what both parties were in ways neither could fully anticipate. He thought, come up. Vhagar rose, not quickly. The body had been still for 170 years and the body knew it. The muscles working through a stiffness beyond anything Jon could imagine, the great neck extending, the legs finding the floor of the chamber, the tail uncurling with the specific patience of something that had no deadline and was in no hurry despite having been hurried at once. It took 2 hours to bring Vhagar from the chamber to the cave mouth. Jon walked beside the dragon the whole way, one hand on the scale, the connection constant, the communication between them not verbal but real. Jon saying here, this passage careful, the ceiling narrows, not with words but with direction, with intent, with the Targaryen blood the dragon was using as a map. At the cave mouth Vhagar stopped. Light, full light, the afternoon light of Dragonstone in autumn, gray and real. Vhagar held at the threshold. Jon stepped out first. He turned back. Vhagar's eye was at the cave mouth, the amber gold in the daylight, the scale visible in the arch of the cave entrance, enormous, the dark of it in relief against the gray sky. Come, Jon said. Vhagar came out. The reaction in the courtyard was the reaction a dragon emerging from the earth produced. Absolute silence, followed by a sound that was not speech, followed by people moving in ways that were the physical expression of encountering something their category system did not have a slot for. The Unsullied took a collective step back. The Dothraki, who had seen Daenerys' dragons from birth and who had been trained out of the instinctive fear of them, stared at Vhagar with the specific look of people who understood that this was different. Not Daenerys' dragons, something else, something older. Something that had been sleeping in the ground for 170 years and that wore that sleep in its color, in its movement, in the ancient quality of a body that had been preserved by old Valyrian magic, and that was returning to the world with all the patience of something that had survived long past the civilization that made it. Daenerys was on the steps. She watched Vhagar emerge and she watched Jon beside Vhagar, his hand on the scale, the ease between them that was the most visible evidence of the bond. The way Jon was not afraid and Vhagar was not cautious, and the space between them had none of the distance that existed between an animal and a person who was managing it, and all of the closeness that existed between two things that had recognized each other. Drogon was on the turret above. The black dragon looked down at Vhagar with the unreadable attention of one very large creature regarding another very large creature and doing the arithmetic. Vhagar looked up at Drogon. Neither moved. Then Vhagar looked away toward the sea, toward the sky, toward the horizon in a way that communicated with absolute clarity what Vhagar thought of Drogon's assessment, noted and not particularly relevant. Jon heard Davos make a sound. He looked over. Davos was standing at the courtyard's edge with the expression of a man who had served a king who came back from the dead and who had thought that was the ceiling on the things he was going to have to process in his service, and who was now revising the ceiling upward. Your Grace, Davos said. He didn't specify which grace. It's fine, Jon said. That's a very large dragon, your grace. I know. And you, the two of you. Yes. Right, Davos looked at Vhagar, right. Jon put his hand back on the scale, he thought up. Vhagar spread its wings, the wingspan was massive, the full extension of it shadowed the courtyard and the lower steps and the people on both, the dark scale catching the gray light and throwing it back differently, the color of old things that had been buried. The muscles along the wings were unfamiliar with their own strength. Jon could feel it through the bond, the hesitation of a body relearning what it was capable of. He thought slow. Vhagar went slow. The first jump was 15 feet straight up, the legs pushing and the wings catching, and the dragon landed on the castle's outer wall with a sound the wall felt in its stones. The second jump was higher, the third was flight. Jon stood in the courtyard and watched Vhagar circle the island for the first time in 170 years. Daenerys came to stand beside him. They watched together. Neither said anything for a long time. "He's beautiful," Daenerys said finally, not warmly, accurately, the aesthetic assessment of someone who knew dragons and was making an honest judgment. "He's been sleeping for 170 years, he needs to eat." "We'll handle that," she held the gaze on Vhagar in the sky. "He's Regal's size, maybe a little larger," she paused, "given time he'll grow." "How long?" "Dragons don't stop growing, not while they're alive." Jon watched Vhagar bank over the sea. The thought came to him, if the Night King takes one of the dragons, there are still three, and if all four face the army of the dead together, the math changes. The math that had been impossible becomes survivable, which did not mean it became easy. He thought, I need to bring Vhagar north, and every lord who sees me on a dragon is going to decide I'm supposed to be king. He needed to figure out how to prevent that. He didn't think he could. Above them, Vhagar found the thermals above the volcanic island and rose until the dark wings were a point against the gray sky. And Jon felt the dragon through the bond, the specific joy of a creature that had been in the dark for 170 years and was at last in the air again. The first ride, what flying meant. The first ride was on the third day. Vhagar had been flying without Jon, solo flights. The dragon relearning the air without the complication of a rider, developing the muscle memory of a body that had been still for 170 years. Jon had watched from the cliff each time, the bond running constant, feeling what Vhagar felt through the connection and building the understanding of what flight was from the receiving end. Theory was one thing, he had understood that intellectually. He had read the histories of dragon riders and he had heard the accounts from Daenerys about what it was to be on Drogon, and he had understood them in the way you understood things you hadn't experienced. He had not understood them the way you understood things you had. He climbed Vhagar on the third morning without ceremony. The dragon had a saddle, a Dragonstone saddle, old leather and old metal found in the castle storage rooms where it had been kept for 170 years by the chamberlains who had maintained the castle through multiple dynasties without knowing why. The saddlery for an extinct dragon was worth keeping. It had been sized for the previous rider. It did not fit Jon perfectly. It fit him well enough. Vhagar stood in the cliff field and Jon climbed and settled and put his hands on the neck in front of the wing joint, the position Daenerys had described and that he had been studying in his head for 3 days. He thought up. Vhagar went up. The first moment of flight was not what Jon had expected and was also exactly what he had expected, and the two things were not contradictory. He had expected the motion and the height and the wind. He had built them from description and imagination and they were present and accurate. What he had not been able to imagine was the bond under flight conditions, the way the connection between rider and dragon was different in the air than on the ground. On the ground the bond was a presence, the awareness of another consciousness beside his, Vhagar's intelligence adjacent to his own, readable but separate. In the air the bond collapsed the separation. What Vhagar felt, Jon felt simultaneously. The wind over the wing's surface, the thermal rising from the volcanic island, the specific orientation of a creature that navigated by instinct rather than by calculation, and that knew where it was in the sky the way Jon knew where his sword hand was in the dark. The ground fell away and the sea appeared and the sky opened in every direction, and Jon felt all of it through two nervous systems simultaneously. It was the most overwhelming thing that had ever happened to him. Not frightening, overwhelming in the way that the most true things were overwhelming. The way dying had been overwhelming. The way coming back had been overwhelming. The way Ghost's bond was overwhelming if he let himself feel it fully rather than managing it to background presence. This was that but scaled to a dragon, which was to say it was that but orders of magnitude beyond what a wolf bond produced. He thought this is what they were, the dragon lords, not kings who happen to have dragons, people who happen to also be human. Vhagar banked over the sea. Jon held on and let the bond run and felt the island below, felt the cold of the water, felt the thermal off the volcanic rock, felt Daenerys watching from the cliff's edge, felt her watching. Vhagar's intelligence registering the figure on the cliff and identifying it as significant to Jon and therefore worth noting. He thought, go higher. Vhagar went higher. The island disappeared beneath cloud and then the cloud was below them and the sky above was the blue-gray that existed above cloud cover. The sky that Jon had never seen from below and that was from above simply enormous. The ceiling gone. The world opened into something that did not have edges. He held on, he thought with the part of him that was End Stark's son, this is terrifying. He thought with the part of him that was something older, this is home. Vhagar understood both. They came down an hour later and Jon dismounted on legs that needed a moment to remember what legs were for. Vhagar bent his head and Jon put his hand on the scale and they held the bond in the aftermath of flight the way you held a fire after coming in from the cold. Daenerys was at the field's edge. How was it? She said. Jon looked at her. I understand, he said. She held the gaze. Yes, she said, you do now. She went back to the keep. Jon stood in the field with Vhagar and the sound of the sea below and the bond between them and thought about what it meant to understand something that had only ever been story before and what it changed in you to understand it. Everything he decided, everything and nothing, that was the wrong thing. The Lords, how the word traveled. The word traveled faster than anyone planned for, which was to say it traveled at the speed of human nature, which was very fast. A Dragonstone servant mentioned it to a fisherman. The fisherman told his wife in King's Landing. The wife mentioned it to her neighbor, who was a washerwoman who worked for a lesser lord's household. The lesser lord wrote to his cousin, who was a bannerman to a greater lord. The greater lord wrote to 3 other greater lords and to the council of the faith. Within 10 days of Vhagar rising from the cave, everyone who mattered in the 7 kingdoms had received some version of the story. The story as it traveled was this. A Targaryen dragon lord had arrived at Dragonstone, and a dragon that had been sleeping in the island's heart for 170 years had woken for him, and he was either Rhaegar's bastard or Rhaegar's true son, depending on which version of the story you received. Jon received letters. He received them from lords he had never spoken to and from lords he had met once at Winterfell during Robert's visit, when Jon had been eating at the side table and the lords had not noticed him. He received them from houses he had to look up on Dragonstone's maps and from houses whose sigils he recognized from years of training at Winterfell. He received them from northern lords who were writing to tell him they supported him and from river lords who were writing to sound out where he stood and from Vale lords who were writing to say that Lady Arryn would be interested in a conversation. He read them all. He gave most of them to Tyrion without answering. These aren't for me, Jon said, handing Tyrion the day's stack. They're for the man they think I am. I'm not that man. You are, though, Tyrion said, leafing through the stack. Legally speaking, biologically, draconically, if that's a word. He looked at one letter. Lord Edmure Tully would like to formally request an audience. That's interesting. He's been a Daenerys supporter. Was, Jon said. Was, yes, Tyrion held the letter. The was is the problem. Every lord who switches from her column to the interested in Jon Snow column is a lord I have to manage from Daenerys' side. He looked at Jon. Can I ask you something directly? You're going to ask me anyway. Yes, when this is over, when the Night King is dealt with, what do you actually intend to do? Go home, King in the north, take Vhagar north, hold the wall. And if the lords press for more, then I'll tell them no. They'll press harder. Then I'll tell them no again. Jon held his gaze. Tyrion, I did not come south to be king. I came south because the dead are real and because I needed allies. I'm going home after. Tyrion set the letters down. You might not be able to. I want you to understand that. It's not that I don't believe you. I do. Which is the problem? You mean it. But meaning it doesn't protect you from the world deciding it wants you anyway. He held on to it. Daenerys crossed a sea with 3 dragons and an army and a legitimate claim 3 generations in the making, and the lords are hedging. You arrived in a boat with 6 men and the island's hidden dragon chose you and the lords are writing letters. He held the gaze. That's not fair, it's true. Jon said nothing. She knows, Tyrion said. She's not an idiot, she watches every letter that comes in, she knows who they're from and what they say before you do most of the time. He held onto it. She is managing her response with remarkable composure, and I don't know how long that composure holds. It'll hold. She's not her father. No, she's not. Tyrion looked at him. She's also not guaranteed to remain not her father under sufficient pressure. No one is. She has been under enormous pressure since she arrived in Westeros, and the pressure keeps increasing, and now there is another Targaryen with another dragon eating into the support she needs. Jon looked at the remaining letters. What do you suggest? I suggest, Tyrion said, that you and the Queen present a unified front, loudly, publicly, that you make it clear repeatedly, visibly in front of witnesses that you came here as an ally and that you are leaving as an ally and that the throne is not what you're here for. He held on to it. And then I suggest that you go north as quickly as possible. Take the dragon glass, take Vhagar, get back to the war that actually matters. The more time you spend on this island, the more time the lords have to write letters, and the more time the letters have to change the situation into something neither of you can manage. Jon held his gaze. I want to bring her north. I've been trying to convince her to come north. She needs to see the dead for herself the way Robert needed to see it. And she hasn't committed. I know. Tyrion poured wine. Let me work on that. He left with the letters. Jon looked at the window, at the sea, at the sky above the sea where Vhagar was a dark shape banking in the gray morning. He thought, every day I stay here is a day someone somewhere decides I should be king. He thought, I need to go north. Sansa, what she wrote. Sansa's letter arrived on the 12th day. It was longer than most of what Jon received, and the length was itself information. Sansa did not write long letters when short ones would do. He read it in his room with Ghost at his feet. The letter said, Jon, the Northern Lords are arguing. Lords Glover, Serwyn, and Dustin want to write to you about the succession. I have told them the succession is not on the table, and they have listened with the polite tolerance of men who have decided they know better than I do. Littlefinger has been attentive in the way he is attentive when he thinks an opportunity is forming. I am watching him. You should know he is watching you. The other thing, several lords have said privately to me what they would not write to you directly, that a Targaryen king would suit them better than a Targaryen queen. Not because of anything specific Jon Snow has done. Because of what he is, northern, male, Westerosi-born. This is not politics I endorse. It is politics that exists. Come home, however this goes, come home. The North needs you more than the South does. Your sister. Jon held the letter. He read the Littlefinger line twice. He wrote back. Sansa. Watch Littlefinger. Keep him away from information about the succession arguments. His interest in any political opening is not for us. Tell the lords the succession isn't on the table. Tell them I mean it. Tell them if they want to argue about who sits the Iron Throne, they're welcome to go south and argue it in person. I'll come home after the fight. He sealed the letter and thought about Littlefinger. The way Littlefinger moved through political openings, the way water moved through rock, not by force but by finding the crack. A Jon Snow on a dragon was a crack in a dozen existing structures. Littlefinger would be finding the crack and making it wider. He went to find Davos. Send for Brienne of Tarth, he said. Tell her Sansa needs her in Winterfell. She goes home before we leave. She's not going to like leaving you. Tell her Sansa is more important. He held Davos's gaze. She knows that's true, she'll go. He was right, Brienne went. King's Landing, what Cersei did. Cersei received the news about the fourth dragon on the morning of the 7th day. Qyburn brought it to her in the throne room, not because it required the throne room, but because Cersei had been spending her mornings in the throne room since the dragons had first appeared over Dragonstone, in the specific way that people occupied their strongest position when the world was doing things they hadn't planned for. She read the report, she read it twice, she set it down. Tell me what you know about the dragon. It was sleeping in the island's foundations, Qyburn said. Our source isn't close enough to provide precise detail, but the accounts describe a dragon significantly larger than the Queen's 3, larger than the 2 smaller ones, comparable or superior to the black one. Old, not recently hatched. He paused. Preserved somehow. The wildfire scholars I've consulted say old Valyrian magic and volcanic stone could theoretically sustain a living creature in a state of reduced function for. I don't need the scholarship, I need the implication. Qyburn folded his hands. The implication is that Daenerys Targaryen is no longer the only Targaryen dragonlord. The northerner who arrived at Dragonstone, who we had been treating as an inconvenient but manageable vassal of the Targaryen queen, appears to be Targaryen himself. The dragon's choice of him is the evidence. Dragons do not bond with people who aren't of the blood. Cersei held the throne, Rhaegar's son. That appears to be the working theory among every intelligent source I have. The marriage evidence from Dorne that has been circulating in certain Meister circles for 30 years suggests he is not merely a bastard but legitimately born. Cersei looked at the map. 4 dragons. Currently 3, 1 was lost north of the wall, Night King's doing apparently, 3 remain. Cersei processed this. She processed it with the quality of a woman who operated at a level of political intelligence her court consistently underestimated because they were too busy fearing her to watch her think. 3 dragons, 2 Targaryens, the Night King dead if the ravens were accurate, and the lords of the 7 kingdoms writing letters about a man they were calling Aegon. They're going to come south, she said. Daenerys has always been coming south, now she has she stopped. An alliance, whether she wanted it or not. The man with the dragon has given her legitimacy she didn't have before among northern lords. Certainly, Qyburn said, the Reach and the Vale have been corresponding with Dragonstone. Everyone has been corresponding with Dragonstone. She held the throne. What's our position if they come south together? Difficult. 3 dragons against the Scorpions. The Scorpions are improved, Your Grace, significantly, but 3 dragons and the Unsullied and the Dothraki combined with what the North can field. I know what the math says, I'm asking what our options are. Qyburn was quiet for a moment. Your Grace, he said carefully, the man they're calling Aegon, the accounts suggest he doesn't want the throne, that he came south specifically for the Northern War and intends to return north. If that is true... If that is true, Cersei said, then Daenerys comes south with 2 dragons and the backing of the king in the north and the moral authority of having just saved the world from the dead. She looked at the map. Which is not a position I can fight, not militarily. She was quiet. Begin negotiations. Qyburn blinked. With Dragonstone. With Dragonstone, not surrender, negotiation, there's a difference. She held the throne. I want terms I can survive, terms that keep my children alive and my name intact and some portion of what I've built standing. She looked at him. I have been gambling on my enemies dividing. They haven't divided. I need a different strategy. Qyburn held his gaze. A wise decision, Your Grace. I know, I don't need you to tell me it's wise. I need you to arrange the meeting before Daenerys decides a meeting isn't necessary. She held the throne. Do it today. He left. Cersei held the throne. She thought about dragons. She thought about what her family had done to the dragons and what the dragons had done to her family, and the specific shape of a dynasty that had ruled for 300 years and that had been destroyed ultimately by the things it had created. By the fire, by the blood, by the creature sleeping in a cave that had woken up for a bastard northern king. She thought father would have had a plan. She thought, father is gone, I need my own plan. She thought, surviving is a plan. She sat in the throne room and she began to build it. Jon and Daenerys, what they built. The 2 weeks at Dragonstone were not easy, but they were productive, not in the political sense. The politics were a constant managed disaster. The letters coming in and Tyrion managing them and Varys threading information through channels and neither Jon nor Daenerys being fully in control of the story the world was building about them. In the personal sense. In the sense of 2 people who had been handed a situation they hadn't asked for and who were slowly, grudgingly, with considerable friction, working out how to be in the same space. They trained the dragons together. This was Jon's suggestion and Daenerys' grudging agreement, and it was the right decision because the dragons needed to know each other, and because Vhagar and Drogon needed to establish the specific hierarchy that large predators established when they were in proximity, and the establishing required both riders present to manage it. Drogon was dominant. He had been dominant for years, the largest of the 3, the one Daenerys had bonded with most completely. And Vhagar was new to the air and still recovering the muscle memory of flight. And Drogon communicated his dominance with the ease of a creature that had been the largest thing in any room for a long time, and that was used to that fact going uncontested. Vhagar did not contest it. This surprised Jon. He had expected the ancient dragon's lineage, Vhagar's descendant, the blood of the largest Targaryen dragon in history, to produce a different response to Drogon's dominance. What it produced instead was something more interesting. Vhagar simply did not acknowledge it, not defiance, not submission, the specific response of something that was old enough to understand that the hierarchy question was not urgent. Daenerys noticed, he doesn't defer to Drogon. He doesn't fight him either. He acts like Drogon isn't worth the argument. Maybe he is from Vhagar's perspective. Jon held the gaze on the 2 dragons. Drogon is 6 years old. Vhagar died at 250 years. Her descendant has been sleeping since 130 after the conquest. Whatever Hager's age is, it's not measured on the same scale. Daenerys watched the dragons. He's larger every day, Hager, he's growing faster than Drogon did. He was already grown when he went to sleep. He's not growing from scratch, he's coming back. Jon held the gaze on the dragons. Give it a month, he'll be bigger than Regal. She was quiet for a moment. That worries you. Jon looked at her. Why would it worry me? Because the larger the dragon, the harder to ignore the writer. Because every lord who sees Hager in 3 months is going to write twice as many letters as the lords who saw him last week. She watched the dragons. The political pressure is going to increase as he grows. Then we go north before he grows more. She watched the dragons. Come north with me, he said. You've been saying you need to see the dead. Come north and see them. Bring all 3. He looked at her. 2 Targaryens, 4 dragons. If the Night King's army has a weakness, fire is it. We test the fire against the dead before the dead reach the wall. She looked at him. If I go north, I'm leaving the south without a dragon over it. Cersei will see that as an opportunity. Cersei will need to wait. The Night King doesn't wait. The dead don't wait. Cersei can be fought in the spring. What's building beyond the wall cannot. She held the gaze. She had been asking him in various ways to convince her. He had understood this for days. The questions she asked were the questions of someone building a case rather than interrogating one. She wanted to go. She needed the argument to go. Give me a week, she said. I have logistics to arrange. The Unsullied need to be deployed before I leave. There are garrison questions for Dragonstone. She held the gaze. A week. A week, Jon said. She turned back toward the keep. Jon. He turned. She looked at him. I believed you about the dead from the second day. I want you to know that. He looked at her. I know. She went inside. Jon stood in the dragon field and watched Hager and Drogon on the cliff's edge, the dark ancient shape beside the brilliant black one, the old dragon and the young one sitting in proximity with the specific equilibrium of things that had decided not to decide the question. He thought, she's coming north. He thought, when she sees it, she'll understand. He thought, I hope understanding is enough. Beyond the wall, what 4 dragons meant. They rode north together, not the full force. Daenerys brought 1/3 of her Unsullied by sea and overland, enough to defend a staging point south of the wall while the primary operation went north of it. Jon rode ahead on Hager. Daenerys followed on Drogon with Regal and Viserion flanking. 4 dragons over the north. The small folk came out to watch, not the way they came out to watch lords pass on horseback. The way people came out when the sky changed. They came out of houses and fields and the doors of inns in every village and holdfast between Dragonstone and the wall, tilting their faces up, holding still, doing the thing people did when they were encountering something their generation had not been built to contain. Jon felt Hager's pleasure at the cold. The further north they flew, the more the dragon's flight changed, not faster or higher, something in the quality of it. The ease that a body found when it returned to the temperature it was designed for. Hager had been sleeping under a volcano, but the ancestors of Hager's line had flown over Westeros at the height of the Targaryen dynasty, and the cold of the north was a thing the blood remembered. They landed at Eastwatch. Commander Tormund Giantsbane was at the gate. He had been warned by Raven, but Jon suspected the Raven's description had not fully prepared Tormund for the experience of 4 dragons landing in the field outside Eastwatch's walls, which was the kind of thing that even Tormund Giantsbane needed a moment to absorb. He absorbed it. Crows, Tormund said, looking at the dragons and then at Jon and then at Daenerys and then at the dragons again. You brought more dragons. One of them is mine. Which one? Hager, the dark one. Tormund looked at Hager. The dark one is very large. He was larger before he went asleep. Tormund opened his mouth and closed it. Inside, he said, drink first, then you tell me what happened. Jon introduced Daenerys to Tormund over cups that were technically ale but that Jon suspected had not started as ale and had become ale through a process Tormund would explain at length if asked. Daenerys drank it with the expression of a woman who had drunk worse and survived, which she had. Tormund described the situation north of the wall. They are moving, the dead, the cold, faster than last month. The scouts we send north, the ones who come back, say the army is moving in a line south, not fast but steady. He held Jon's gaze. The wall, going to be tested this winter, not maybe, is going to. How long? Month, maybe 2. Tormund looked at the window. Your dragon glass going out to the garrisons, your obsidian arrows and blades, the Watch's rangers have them, the free folk fighters have them, but Jon, he held on to it. We've been doing our counts from the scouts. The army of the dead has numbers that the dragon glass doesn't solve. The math doesn't work without. He looked at the ceiling in the direction of where 4 dragons were currently standing outside the walls. Without those. Jon looked at Daenerys. We need to go north of the wall now, before the army reaches us. We need to see what we're dealing with, and we need the dead to see what we have. Daenerys looked at him, a provocation. A demonstration? We go north, we find the army, we show them fire, we learn whether 4 dragons can break the advance or whether we need to wait for the wall and fight defensively. He looked at her. We need the information. And if we provoke an immediate attack, then we'll have provoked it on our terms rather than theirs. Tormund looked at both of them. I'm coming. You'll need horses. We're flying. I know, Tormund finished his cup. I need a different drink first. The expedition north of the wall assembled the next morning. 30 men on horseback to serve as the ground element. Jon on Vhagar, Daenerys on Drogon, Rhaegal and Viserion flying formation. Tormund, Jorah Mormont, Davos and a selection of men who had been specifically chosen for the ranging. They flew north from Eastwatch into the gray morning. The cold changed beyond the wall. Jon had felt it before, the wrong cold, the cold that was not weather. He had been feeling it in ranging reports for years, had sat in Castle Black and read the descriptions and built the understanding from second-hand accounts. On Vhagar flying north he felt it through the dragon. Vhagar felt it too. The specific registration of something ancient meeting something that was the enemy of ancient things. And the feeling was not fear but alert, the way a wolf scented something it knew to be wrong. They found the army in the afternoon. The army, what the dead looked like from above. From above, the army of the dead looked like the land had decided to walk, not the specific shapes of individual figures. From dragon height those resolved into texture, the surface of the frozen ground acquiring a quality that was not geological but the mass of it, the scale. Jon had read the ranging reports. He had built the numbers in his head. Numbers in the head were not numbers in the body, which was what he was feeling now. The body understanding, in a way the mind couldn't preempt, that what was below was the extinction of everything he knew if it wasn't stopped. Beside him Vhagar banked and Jon felt the dragon's specific response to the army below. Not fear. The old blood remembered this. The last long night was in the dragon's inheritance the way the wrong cold was in the Night King's, but the full attention of something that had been built for exactly this encounter, and that was doing the calculation it had been waiting to do. On Drogon beside him Daenerys said nothing. Her face, from what Jon could see at this distance, was doing what it had done in the cave, not performing. The actual Daenerys. The woman who had built an army and crossed a sea and not yet fully believed the thing she'd been told about the dead, and who was now at dragon height above it and believing it. How many? Daenerys' voice carried on the wind. Hundreds of thousands. She was quiet. Can fire kill them? It kills whites. It stops the dead from walking. The White Walkers, the ones that direct them, need dragon glass or Valyrian steel. He held the gaze ahead. There are 4 of us. If we attack the army now, we burn whites and the whites don't come back. We can do real damage. And the Night King. He'll be in there somewhere if he comes out. Jon held the gaze on the army below. If he comes out and he's exposed and we can reach him, we end it. Maybe, Jon said, maybe we end it. She looked at the army below. Do it. They dove. What fire did to the army of the dead wasn't what fire did to a living army. A living army scattered. It broke and ran, and the fire followed the people, and the people were mobile and spread the damage as they moved. The dead did not scatter. The dead burned where they stood, the whites catching and burning and falling, and the fire moved through the army not like a wave but like a slow eraser, one figure and then the next and the next. And the burning did not spread to its neighbors the way fire spread among the living, because the dead did not have the warmth that sustained the spread. But the fire was not unlimited. Vhagar and Drogon and Rhaegal and Viserion banked and dove and breathed and rose and banked and dove again, and each pass cleared a corridor of the army, and the corridors did not heal. The burned dead stayed burned. But the army was so large that corridors were what you cut in forests when you wanted to cross them, and the forest was still the forest around the corridor. Jon counted the passes. 6 passes in, something changed. He felt it through Vhagar first. The bond. The dragon's specific alertness going to a different register, not the combat alert that had been there since the dive but something else, older, the recognition of a very large, very cold thing. Jon looked for the Night King. He found him in the army's center on a dead horse, elevated on a ridge of frozen ground, watching the dragons with the patience of a general who had been fighting a war for longer than anyone breathing had been alive, and who had learned that patience was the only variable that mattered. The Night King raised his hand. Jon thought down and reached for Vihager's bond and was half a second too late. The ice lance caught Vihager in the left wing. The fall, what the Night King did. The pain arrived through the bond like a wall, not Jon's pain, Vihager's, but the bond did not distinguish. The connection transmitted the wing strike as directly as if Jon had taken the lance himself, the cold shooting through the left side of his body in the mirror of what the dragon felt, and Jon gripped the saddle harness and held on because falling was not something he could afford. Vihager screamed. The sound of a dragon in pain was not a sound the world made ordinarily. It was not like any animal sound Jon had heard, not like a horse, not like a wolf. It was older and larger, and it cut through the cold air over the frozen north, and something in the army below went still, even the dead registering that the sound was significant. The wing was damaged but not gone, the membrane torn, the injury significant but not crippling, the wing still functional enough to keep them in the air at a reduced capacity. Jon felt Vihager making the assessment through the bond, the great intelligence of the ancient dragon evaluating the damage with the same precision it had brought to everything. And the assessment was functional but coming down. Down, Jon said through gritted teeth, east of the army. Vihager went east. Jon looked back. The Night King had raised his hand again. He was looking at Viserion. Jon shouted something. He would not remember what he shouted. The sound carried on the wind the wrong direction, and Daenerys was already pulling Drogon into a dive toward the army's far side, and Viserion was banking to avoid a white column and did not see the Night King's position until the second lance was already in the air. The lance struck Viserion in the throat. The sound that followed was the worst sound Jon had ever heard, and he had heard terrible things. The sound of the village at Hardhome, the sound of the wildlings dying at the wall, the sound of arrows in bodies and swords in armor. This was the sound of a dragon dying, and the sound of it was a physical thing, the air around it disrupted by something that was too large and too suddenly gone. Viserion fell? He fell in a spiral, the great white-gold body descending in the slow, terrible way of something that had lost the thing that kept it up. And he hit the ice of a frozen lake below with a sound that the ice felt for a quarter-mile in every direction. Jon watched it happen. He watched Daenerys watch it happen. She was on Drogon 200 yards away, and she had turned at the sound, and she saw her dragon fall, and Jon was too far away to see her face, but he felt what crossed the air between them. The specific quality of a person watching something irreplaceable become gone, which was not dramatic in the way the songs made it and was not anything except what it was, which was a person losing something. He thought, get her out. Vihager came down on the frozen ground east of the army's edge. The landing was controlled, barely. The wing managing the asymmetric load of the injury. The great body coming down with the specific care of something that was hurt and knew it, and was managing the hurt rather than surrendering to it. They hit the ground, and Vihager's left wing folded immediately, the torn membrane refusing the extended position. Jon dismounted. He went to the wing. The ice lance had torn a section of the membrane the size of a ship's sail, not the bones. The bones had taken the impact and held. Vihager's blood running true, the structural integrity of an ancient line maintaining even under an ice lance at dragon altitude. But the membrane, flight-required membrane. Vihager breathed on him, not fire, breath, the warm recognition, the bond communicating, I'm here, I'm hurt, I'm staying. I know, Jon said, come on, we have to move. He heard Drogon land behind him. He turned. Daenerys was already off the dragon, running not toward him, toward the frozen lake where Viserion had fallen. He caught her arm. We can't. She turned on him, her face. He had thought he'd seen Daenerys in her most real moments at the cliff, in the cave, at dinner. None of those. This was the most real he'd seen her. This was the face without any architecture left in it. The person when everything that protected her had gone. He's down there. He's gone, Daenerys, he's gone, and we have to. He's down there. The army is 200 yards behind us, we have to move. He held her arm. The army of the dead was moving slowly. They were always slow when they weren't directed, but moving toward the sound of the fallen dragon. We go now, we come back when we have a plan, you come back when we have a way to come back and not lose someone else. She looked at him. He had called her Daenerys. He had not meant to, it had arrived without planning. She looked at him, then she said very quietly, all right. They went back to Eastwatch. Regal had followed. Vihagar limped south on the ground for the first 2 miles before the wing regained enough structural integrity to carry limited weight, and the flight back was slow and lopsided, and Jon felt every wing beat as a separate managed pain through the bond. And he felt Vihagar managing it with the patience of something that had been in the dark for 170 years, and that knew how to be patient with pain. They came down at Eastwatch at nightfall. Tormund was at the gate. He looked at the 3 dragons. He looked at the space where a 4th should be. He did not say anything. He led them inside. Daenerys, what the falling cost. Nobody came to her room that night. This was not accidental. Missandei had seen her face when she came in from the field and had quietly and efficiently arranged for the corridor to be empty and the door to be available and the dinner to be left outside rather than delivered. Missandei understood Daenerys in the way that people understood each other when they had spent years together in proximity and had paid attention. Daenerys sat alone. She had been sitting with loss her whole life. Mother, father, brother, the kind that came from dying before you knew them. Drogo, who had been a life she hadn't expected to want. Sir Barristan, people who had believed in her and who the world had taken in various ways that she had managed by continuing to move. Viserion was different. She had walked into fire for him. She had carried him in her arms when he was the size of a cat and breathed smoke that didn't burn her and known, in the way you knew the truest things about yourself, that she was not going to be ordinary. Not because of the dragon. Because of what it meant that the dragon existed, that she existed, that the world was the specific world it was rather than the ordinary one. He had been proof her whole life that she was the thing she believed she was. He was gone, and worse than gone, what the Night King had done, what Jon had described in those flat, careful words. She knew what that meant. She had raised 3 dragons from stone. She understood what the magic required, what a bond between a soul and a dragon meant. She understood exactly what was now happening to Viserion's body on that frozen lake. And the understanding was not clinical. She had cried once, not for long, long enough. Then she had put it away in the place she put things that needed to be put away, the place that was full of other things that had been put away. And she had gotten up from the floor and washed her face and decided what to do next. What to do next was fight. She had always known that grief and action were not incompatible. They had never been incompatible for her. She had wept for Drogo and raised an army. She had mourned Sir Barristan and continued west. She had lost Viserion and she was going to go back north and end the thing that had taken him, and the ending was going to be complete and permanent, and it was going to be done before the end of this winter. Missandei came to her door in the morning. "The king is asking about Vihagar's wing," Missandei said. "Tell him I know," she held the gaze. "Tell him I'll be in the field." She went to the field. She stood beside Regal and she put her hand on his neck and she held the bond, the smaller bond, the 2 of them rather than the 3 she'd had 12 hours ago, and Regal did not need words. He knew. "I know," she said, "I know." She stood with her dragon in the cold northern morning and she let herself feel the specific shape of what was gone for exactly as long as she could afford to feel it. Then she went to find Jon. Eastwatch, what they said to each other. The night after the Maester had done what he could for Vihagar's wing, which was apply a salve and note in his journal that he was treating a dragon, which he did with the specific composure of a man who had decided that his job was to treat injuries and that the species of the injured was a secondary concern. Jon found Daenerys on the Eastwatch battlements. He did not approach immediately. He watched her for a moment. She was looking north, the direction she had not looked north before coming here. The direction the dead were in, the direction Viserion was in. He came to stand beside her. "Tell me what happened," she said. "The Night King targeted Vihagar first because Vihagar is," he paused. "I think the Night King understood what Vihagar was, what the blood means. Eamon told me, a Maester at the wall, that the last long night ended when the ice and the fire met directly. The Night King wanted Vihagar down before that meeting could happen. But Vihagar didn't die. He's Vihagar's blood. He survived things that should have killed him. The wing will heal." He held the gaze north. Viserion, the Night King, saw the opening when Vihagar was hit and Viserion was isolated. He held on to it. "I'm sorry, I should have anticipated the second target. You had your own dragon to manage, yes, and Viserion was mine, my dragon, my responsibility to protect." She held the gaze on the north. "I've been telling myself I kept them safe for 6 years. I raised them, I walked into a fire for them." She held the gaze. "I didn't keep this one safe." Jon said nothing. She held the gaze north. "What does he do with it?" she said. "The Night King, Viserion." Jon had been thinking about this since they landed. He had been thinking about the ranging reports, the ones that described specific cold turning things the way the dead were turned, the specific magic that reanimated the fallen. He had been thinking about a dragon-sized body on a frozen lake and what happened when the wrong cold reached a body that large. The same thing he does with everything, Jon said. She understood. He watched her understand and held the silence because there was nothing useful to say about it, and saying something useless would be worse than saying nothing. Then we don't let him reach the wall with it. No, if an ice dragon hits the wall won't hold. He held on to it. The magic in the wall's foundation, Eamon believed it held against the cold's magic, the ambient cold, the Night King's directed force. But a dragon that can breathe ice against the wall's own eyes, he stopped. We can't let him reach the wall. How much time does Vhagar need to fly again? Jon thought about the bond, the current state of it, the wings managed pain. 3 days, maybe 4, the membrane is torn, but Vhagar heals faster than anything I've ever. He was preserved in old magic for 170 years. Whatever that does to the body, it does it to the healing too. She held the gaze north. 3 days, maybe 4, and after that? After that we go back, but differently. We don't go north again to find them. We let them come to the wall. We fight at the wall where we choose the ground. He held on to it. The Night King's advantage is the cold scale, the numbers, the army, the moving dead. Our advantage is fire and concentrated force. We don't fight the army, we fight the Night King. He looked at her. Kill the Night King, the army falls. That's what Sam's accounts say. That's what the evidence says. You and Vhagar and Drogon and Regal. He held on to it. 3 dragons against 1, the fire of Vhagar's blood and the fire of Daenerys's line. 3 fires against 1 ice dragon and the Night King behind it. She looked at him. Don't apologize for Daenerys. I didn't. He held on to it. Daenerys, 3 dragons, can we do it? She looked north. We'll find out. The waiting, 4 days at Eastwatch. 4 days was a long time to wait for a dragon's wing to heal, and a short time to prepare for the long night. Jon spent the first day with Vhagar in the field outside Eastwatch, where the dragon had settled with the patient economy of something that knew the difference between what it could control and what it couldn't. The wing was healing. Jon could feel it through the bond. The membrane rebuilding in the way that very old magic worked, not quickly but completely. The tissue coming back without scar, the way ancient preserved things came back without the ordinary deterioration of injury. He sat beside the wing. He put his hand on the scale and he held the bond, and he thought about Viserion falling and Daenerys watching, and the specific gap between the 4 dragons they'd flown north and the 3 they'd flown back. And the gap was not only numerical. It was the gap in Daenerys's face, the gap in what she'd been and what the world had now made her. Tormund came to sit with him. Tormund was one of the people in the world who understood how to sit with someone in silence without making the silence a thing that required commentary. He sat. He drank something from a flask. He handed the flask to Jon. Jon drank. They sat. After a while Tormund said, "She's angry." Daenerys. Yes. Good kind of angry or bad kind of angry? Jon thought about this. Both. The good kind that makes her want to go north and end it. The bad kind that might make her want to go south and burn King's Landing first. Tormund absorbed this. Which is she doing? She's in her rooms, writing letters, I think. I haven't seen her since this morning. Tormund nodded. Ygritte died angry, not randomly. Tormund never said things randomly. The North produced people who said what was relevant when it was relevant and nothing else. She died the only way she ever did anything, which was absolutely and without regret. He held the flask. The anger was why she died. Well, it was also why she died. Jon said nothing. The Queen, Tormund said, she's got enough anger to end the Night King. She's also got enough to do things nobody comes back from. He looked at Jon. Don't let her do the second thing. I know. You trust her. Jon considered this. Yes, more than I expected to. Tormund handed him the flask again. The dragon likes this place, Vhagar. He was looking at the dragon's amber eye, which was open and regarding Tormund with the specific attention that Vhagar brought to people who sat with Jon rather than performing around him. He's calmer than Drogon. He's older, he's been through something that would make anything calmer. What's it like, the bond? Jon thought about how to describe it. You know how you know where Ghost is without looking, you know he's nearby and whether he's alert or resting and whether something's wrong. A wolf is a wolf. It's like that but larger and in both directions. He knows where I am, what I'm feeling, whether something's wrong with me. He held the gaze on Vhagar. When the lance hit him, I felt it. Tormund was quiet. That's both terrible and impressive. That's the bond. They sat until the sky started to go dark. Vhagar stretched the injured wings slowly, testing, and the stretch was already better than the previous evening. the range of motion returning incrementally with the evidence of healing. Jon felt the wing through the bond. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow Hagar would be ready. Daenerys came to find him that evening. She came to the field rather than sending for him, which was itself information. She had sent for most things since Viserion fell, the management style of a person who was keeping herself in a room as a form of control. Coming to the field was choosing not to be in the room. She looked at Hagar's wing. How is it? Tomorrow he'll be ready tomorrow. She held the gaze on the wing. I want to tell you something. Jon waited. I spent last night thinking about what I would do if the Night King can't be killed. If we go north and we fight and Drogon and Hagar and Rhaegal aren't enough. She looked at Hagar. What I kept coming back to was, there is no world in which I accept that as the outcome. I don't surrender, I don't retreat, I've been through too much. She held the gaze, but I also kept coming back to something else. She looked at Jon. You were right about the dead, you were right from the beginning. You came south to tell people something real and they looked at you like you were mad and you kept telling them anyway. She held the gaze. I should have come north sooner, I kept waiting for proof that I already had. Jon looked at her. You're here now. I'm here now, she held the gaze. Tomorrow I need to be there. He looked at Hagar. We'll be there, all of us. The long night, how it came to the wall. Hagar was in the air again on the morning of the 5th day, not at full capacity. Jon felt the wing, remaining stiffness through the bond, the membrane healed but not yet trusted. The flight slightly asymmetric in a way that a month of flight would resolve, but in the air, moving, he would have wanted a week. He had 4 days, he used them. The wall's garrison had been preparing since the expedition returned. The obsidian distributed, the fire preparations in place, the dragon glass at every position. The free folk fighters who had come over the wall 2 winters ago were at their stations. The ones who had been fighting the dead longer than the Watch's rangers and who knew the ground north of the wall in the specific way of people who had been raised on it. Jon flew the wall, not inspection, orientation. He flew Hagar from Eastwatch to Castle Black and from Castle Black west and then back east, the 300-mile length of it under them in the gray morning, and he looked at every section and every castle and every staging point, and he held the picture in his head, alongside the picture of the army's advance that the scouts had been sending in ravens for the past 4 days. The army would hit the wall in the east first. He flew east. He found Daenerys at Castle Black with Drogon and Rhaegal waiting. They're coming, Jon said. I know, she held the gaze on the wall ahead of them. The ravens have been arriving since dawn. East section, Eastwatch through the Shadow Tower. He held the gaze on the wall. The Night King will be at the center. He's never been at the vanguard. He directs from center back the army between him and whatever he's attacking. So we have to get through the army. Or around it? Jon was quiet. The army's eastern flank is thinner. He concentrates numbers at the face of the attack. The flanks are managed rather than massed. He held the gaze. We split. Rhaegal takes the western wall. Drogon takes the central. Hagar and I go for the flank. She held the gaze. You're going for the Night King. He'll have the ice dragon with him, Viserion. What Viserion is now, he'll use it at the wall. He'll try to breach the ice. He held on to it. I need to reach the Night King before the ice dragon is positioned. She held his gaze for a moment. And if the ice dragon reaches you first? Hagar is faster than Viserion was. He's been flying for 170 years. Whatever Viserion is now, he hasn't had that. She held the gaze. If you die. I won't, I've already done that once, it didn't take. The corner of her mouth moved, not a smile, the almost. Rely on that, she said. Come on, the dead don't wait. The wall was breached at sunset, not by the ice dragon. The Night King came at the wall from multiple directions, the army's scale producing the spread that the wall's garrison had prepared for, and that was still overwhelming despite the preparation, because preparation accounted for numbers and the numbers were beyond what numbers could account for. The eastern section held for 2 hours. Daenerys and Drogon made 6 passes in the first hour, the black dragon working the army's face at the wall's base, the fire clearing corridors that filled again because the army was too large for corridors to matter. Rhaegal worked the western section where the army was thinner and the fires were more effective. Jon and Hagar went east. The eastern flank was what Jon had calculated it would be, managed rather than massed, the dead present but not concentrated. Enough space between clusters for a dragon to move through without the aerial congestion of the wall's center. He flew low and fast, Hagar's wing holding at the reduced asymmetry that the healing permitted, the bond between them running constant and full. Jon feeling the dragon feeling Jon. The two of them, a single coordinated thing that was the closest either had ever been to functioning as what they were supposed to be. He found the Night King. He was where Jon had calculated him. Center back, elevated, the ice dragon at his left flank, directing. He looked at Vhagar in the sky with the same patience he had looked with from the lake's edge. No surprise, no fear, the acknowledgement of a thing that was finally arriving. Jon flew directly at him. The ice dragon rose. What Viserion had become was not what Viserion had been. The fire was gone. The gold and cream dragon that Daenerys had raised from a stone now breathed ice. Blue-white and cold. The cold that was not weather, the form was the same, the intelligence that operated it was not. Jon felt Vhagar lock in through the bond. He thought, I know. Vhagar breathed first. The fire from Vhagar's throat was not Drogon's fire, not the brilliant clean orange of a young dragon in his prime. It was older, darker at its base. The fire of something that had been burning for 170 years in a volcanic chamber, and that had kept it burning because that was what it was, and the burning was everything the cold was not. The ice dragon veered. The ice dragon's ice and Vhagar's fire met in the air between them, and what they produced was the steam of annihilation. The specific violence of two fundamental opposites colliding, and for a moment